10 a.m. Monday morning. M Clinic is located on the edge of downtown at the end of the hall on the 5th floor of a 5-story multi-tenant building. It's the go-to clinic for people suffering from various mental illnesses such as addiction, depression, obsessive-compulsive disorders, schizophrenia, etc. Dr. M was sitting in front of the desk in the dusty exam room, and in front of him was that day's first patient. A nurse with heavy makeup stood behind the doctor. The doctor was in his mid-50s and had graying hair and a stubble. He had lackluster eyes, and at first glance he looked unprofessional and disheveled. Unless he was wearing his white coat, no one would ever guess he was a doctor. That was just the outward appearance, though. He was outspoken and excellent at his job, and all of his patients put tremendous trust in him. The patient sitting in front of Dr. M was a middle-aged man called Suesaki. He was wearing a white shirt and a grey jacket, his hair parted from the side. He was a pale man with a serious demeanour. "So, you're saying you're afraid that someone who looks like you will eventually kill you?" asked Dr. M. Suesaki nodded with a frightened expression and said, "You still don't believe me, do you? Take a look at this." He pulled out his phone from his jacket pocket, quickly unlocked it and brought up a picture. Dr. M took the phone and brought it close to his face. He studied it hard. Suesaki was standing in it, smiling with a merry-go-round in the background. There were many people around him, walking in various directions. "What about it?" Dr. M asked, looking up at him. Suesaki looked serious and said, "This is from 3 days ago when my girlfriend and I went to the amusement park. Look carefully at the right edge of the screen." Dr. M moved his gaze down. There was a man standing there. He was wearing dark clothes and his hair was a bit long. He was looking off to the side and he kind of looked like Suesaki. It was hard to really tell because just the part where this man was standing was a bit blurry. "Well, I guess you could say this man looks a bit like you, but I'm sure it's just a coincidence," replied Dr. M. After getting his phone back, Suesaki said with a disappointed look on his face, "After I took this picture, that guy almost killed me. I went to the bathroom right after, and when I was washing my hands, I looked in the mirror and saw him standing behind me. When I tried to turn around, he suddenly squeezed my neck from behind. I fought like hell and managed to escape, but I almost blacked out. I followed him with my eyes as he ran away, but I'm sure it was the same guy." "So, you were almost killed by a man who looked just like you?" Suesaki nodded. Dr. M said, "Well then, let's summarize what you've told me so far. About a month ago, you started having strange nightmares. In those dreams, you're walking through a dark and dense forest and a man with the same face as you begins to chase you. And ever since you started having these nightmares, you've also started seeing a man who looks just like you in your actual daily life. Then 3 days ago, you were finally attacked. Do I have it right?" Suesaki nodded in response and began speaking again. "My mother actually passed away a month ago, and it was shortly after that I started having those nightmares. Just before her death, when I went to visit her at the hospital, she confessed that I was actually supposed to have an older brother. I was apparently a twin, but I was the only one that survived because my brother's umbilical cord got wrapped around his neck. He died as a result. She said that after giving birth, my brother often appeared at her side late at night and vent his bitterness against me. He would tell her that I was the one that killed him and that in reality, he was supposed to be the one who was born, not me. My mother apologized to him over and over again and asked him not to hurt me. She said she put her hands together all the time and asked him to please cross over to the other side." "I see," replied Dr. M. "In other words, after your mother passed away, your brother began appearing in your dreams, but recently he's showing up in the real world and has began to threaten your life." Suesaki said yes, and his shoulders and head sunk. At the end of the session, Dr. M prescribed him a tranquilizer and told him to come back for a follow-up visit in a week. After Suesaki left, Dr. M asked the nurse what she thought about his story. She said, "It would be a horrifying story if it was actually true." Dr. M laughed and said that was impossible. Did you see his eyes and face? That was the face of a person who's completely delusional and prone to lying. "But what about that picture?" asked the nurse. "Oh, just a mere coincidence. He was convinced because he's paranoid, and the story of being attacked was probably just a delusion." "Do you think he also lied about what his mother said?" "Yeah, probably. A person who has a tendency to lie is a person who creates lavish stories in their head. Even mystery writers envy their storytelling capabilities." "I guess so," was all the nurse could say. A week later, Suesaki came for his follow-up session. This time, his appearance and attitude had done a 180-degree turn. He seemed to be much more chipper and happy. "Dr. M, I feel like I can finally start a new chapter in my life. Thank you so much," he said, bowing deeply, and left the room in high spirits. After he left, the nurse looked at him and said, "I guess you were right. Everything he said last week must have been a lie." "Yeah, maybe," replied Dr. M as he let out a small sigh. A while later, a middle-aged man wearing a worn-out dark blue jacket came into the clinic. He was a detective from the city. Dr. M was confused as to the purpose of the visit, and the detective wasted no time to get to business. He asked, "Doctor, do you know this person?" and handed him a photo. The doctor looked at it and answered, "Yes, I do." It was Suesaki. About 3 days ago, the mutilated body of a man was discovered in an apartment in the city. A woman close to him became suspicious after she couldn't get in touch with him, so she used his spare key and went to check on him. That's how the body was discovered. I can't say for sure yet, but I believe the body is that of Masamichi Suesaki, aged 43, who lived there. Dr. M looks at the detective in surprise. "What do you mean you believe the body to be Suesaki's?" The detective took a deep breath and began speaking again. "The reason why the body hasn't been identified yet is because the face of the body was mutilated so much that it was impossible to tell what he originally looked like. It looks like someone used something like a gas torch to burn it off. Most of the man's features were melted off. If this was murder, whoever did it must harbor a serious grudge against the victim. Upon further investigation, the estimated time of death of who we believe is Mr. Suesaki was 4 or 5 days ago. It was around the time he visited your clinic." "No, that's impossible," replied Dr. M. "He just left my office 30 minutes ago after a follow-up session. He thanked me and went home. He was very happy and upbeat when he left." The detective widened his eyes and stared at the doctor's face. "I can't believe it. Are you sure it was Mr. Suesaki?" Dr. M nodded with a straight face and replied that he was sure. "But," the doctor continued, "after hearing the details of the case, I'm not so certain it was him anymore." In the end, the detective told Dr. M to contact him as soon as Suesaki or a lookalike came to the clinic again, and left. After the detective left, the doctor sat alone in a chair at the reception, stunned. That man who visited the clinic today, he looked exactly like Suesaki, and the things he said also made sense. So who was the dead man in his apartment? And if it was Suesaki that was actually murdered, then who the hell came to see me earlier? The man had mentioned how he was able to start a new chapter in life. What did he mean by that? As Dr. M continued to turn everything over in his mind, the more freaked out he became. His heart began beating faster, and a cold shiver ran down his spine. Last month, a friend of mine passed away. I'm not satisfied with the way he died, so I'm posting it here. I've known him since college, so for about 10 years. We got along really well, and I can safely say that he was my closest friend. We both attended a local university, but I found a job in Tokyo and moved away, while he got a job at a local company. I went home anytime I had a bit of time off, so we still hung out quite often. It must have been about 5 years ago. As usual, I returned home at the end of the year, and my friend and I were out having a drink. We were talking about work, girls, the usual catch-up banter. My friend suddenly looked like he remembered something. With a grin on his face, he took out his phone and turned the screen towards me. Take a look at this. That's me on the right, but I don't remember who the girl on the left is. It looked like he had taken a picture of a photograph in an album. My friend was still really small, and he was standing on a bridge with a waterfall in the background. This place was our town's famous tourist destination. He had a big smile and was making a peace sign with his left hand. To his right was a girl that seemed to be the same age. The two were holding hands, but for some reason the girl was facing the waterfall, her back towards the camera, so I couldn't see her face at all. He apparently found an old album when he was doing his end-of-the-year cleanup. He flipped through it to travel down memory lane when he came across that picture. He'd never been in a relationship before, so he was ecstatic to see that his younger self seemed to have a girlfriend. He wanted to find her and reach out to her, but no matter who he asked, no one could figure out who she was. I, too, had no idea who it could be, and the conversation ended there. The next time I went home was in May during Golden Week. There was no mention of that photograph. I was secretly anticipating that he'd found the girl, but with no conversations about it, I began to give up on ever finding out who she was. But one day, on a super hot summer day, I suddenly received a phone call from him. "Hey, do you have time to talk?" He was sounding a bit nervous, so I told him sure and asked him what happened. He said, "Do you remember that photograph I showed you before?" I immediately figured he had found her and was excited to get this news. I told him I did remember indeed, and he responded, "This is going to sound weird, but I think she's moving." "What?" I said incredulously. I didn't understand what he was trying to say. My friend continued to talk over me with the same tone of voice and said, "Ever since I found that photo, I've been looking at the album every now and then, and the girl's face is moving. It looks like she's slowly beginning to turn around." I told him it had to be his imagination, but he was adamant that he wasn't seeing things. There was no point in talking about it, so I told him to send me a picture of it and hung up. He's always loved scary stories and paranormal things, so I didn't believe a word he said because what he described was impossible. My friend texted me the picture straight away. I looked at it closely, but because it had been more than 6 months since he first showed it to me, I couldn't remember enough details to see any changes in the girl. I texted him and told him what I thought. He never replied. I didn't get to go home at the end of that year because I had too much work to do. After our last phone call, I finally saw him 3 years ago, and we met up as usual for some drinks. When I laid eyes on him for the first time, I immediately felt uncomfortable. There isn't a very nice way to put it, but he seemed a lot less hygienic and looked like he had aged several years. He didn't seem to notice any of those changes, and the first thing he said to me was, "The girl, the one in the photo, she's definitely moving. Take a look, I brought the actual picture for you." He sounded excited as he pulled it out of his bag and showed it to me. I honestly didn't feel like looking at it again, but I decided to entertain him one last time. Holy shit. He was right. The girl was definitely angled differently, as if she was turning around, but her face was still hidden. If she keeps moving like this, I'll eventually get to see her face, right? Then I might be able to figure out who she is. He was definitely excited about finding out who she was so he could contact her. Never mind the fact that this was actually terrifying. He continued to talk about her most of the time we were together, and when we finally parted ways, for the first time in my life, I regretted meeting up with him. From then on, whenever we met up or talked on the phone, he wouldn't stop talking about this girl. I began to feel extremely hesitant to meet up with him in person, not only because he was starting to get annoying, but also because his physical appearance began to deteriorate at an alarming rate. His hair, his clothes, his face, everything was disarrayed, and he became someone I was embarrassed to be around. But that photograph, something was definitely going on because the girl was continuing to turn around. In fact, the last time I saw it was a year ago, and I could see the side of her face. My friend had sent a snapshot of it to my phone with the words, "Just a little more." Part of me was looking forward to seeing her face clearly the next time, but even before I could get there, my friend died. One day last month, he called me around 1 a.m. I was surprised to get a call that late, so I picked up straight away. "Hey, help me. Please, help me. Help." He sounded really frightened. Worried, I asked him what was wrong, and he told me in a broken voice that the girl was almost facing forward, that he could almost see her eyes, and that he was terrified. It didn't sound like a joke. I wanted to go see him straight away, but with work and how far away Tokyo was to my hometown, it was impossible. I did the next best thing, which was to talk to him about something cheerful to get his mind off it. I guess it worked because he gradually began to relax and he started drinking, saying it was better to drink and numb his fear. "I'm sorry I called you so late. I feel a lot better now, thanks to you." It sounded like the alcohol was beginning to take effect, and he said cheerfully, "I'll let you go now. Good night and thank you." Thinking back on this conversation, which was the last time I ever talked to him, I feel like the thank you at the end went a lot deeper than an expression of gratitude for that night. The next morning, I woke up feeling anxious and called my friend, but no matter how many times I tried, he didn't pick up. Around noon, I received a call from a landline. It was my friend's mother, and she told me that my friend was dead. He still lived at home with his parents, and she had found him that morning. She told me the police were investigating and for me to come to his funeral if possible. I couldn't stop crying. I beat myself up over hanging up the phone last night. If I had talked to him all through the night, maybe he wouldn't have died. A few days later, after the funeral was over, I had a chance to talk to his mother. She told me that the police ruled that his death was an accident, but that she didn't think so. He had apparently been acting strange leading up to his death, almost like he was being possessed by something. She just couldn't believe that he took his own life. Knowing what I knew, I couldn't agree with her more. I contemplated telling her about the picture, but decided against it, thinking it wasn't the time nor the place to bring something like that up. Under what circumstances did he die? I asked her because I just had to know. He drowned in the bathtub. He was still fully clothed. I couldn't shake off a terrible feeling. His mum continued. There was a piece of paper floating in the tub. The material looked like it might have been a photograph, but it was so crumpled and damaged that I couldn't make out what was on it. Shit, I thought. I'm still convinced that it was the girl in that photo that led my friend to his death. Maybe it wasn't a girl at all. Maybe it was the Grim Reaper. A few years ago, I used to have a friend called Kanae. Her boyfriend was handsome and worked in a large company, but he was married and had 2 children. In other words, he was having an affair with Kanae, but she was really happy to be with him and had plans to break his marriage. She wanted to have him for herself and even wanted the luxury apartment in which he lived with his wife and kids. As long as his wife didn't find out about her, her lover wouldn't have to pay much alimony when they divorced. That was perfect for her because she wanted him to keep as much of his wealth as possible. She shouldn't have been so open about these things, but I think she told me all the minute details of her evil plan. She Googled the wife and found pictures of her, which she showed me. She also showed me his wife's work accomplishments and said nothing but insults toward a woman whom I saw as beautiful and intelligent. I felt grossed out by her selfish desires, but she had her own store close to where I lived at the time, so I couldn't really avoid her. She also had a very evil and malicious side to her, so I was scared to ignore her because of what she might do to me. One day, I ran into Kanae's boyfriend, his wife, and their children at the food court of a department store. I was also there enjoying a day out with my kids. I recognized them straight away because Kanae had shown me pictures of both of them. They seemed like a really close-knit family that others might feel envious about. They were laughing and having a great time together. I couldn't believe that a man that looked so kind and doting was cheating on his wife with someone like Kanae. As I was feeding my daughter while thinking those thoughts, her stuffed animal dropped from the edge of the table to the floor. I reached down to pick it up when another hand went for it before I could. I raised my head while thanking that person and saw that the wife was standing in front of me. She was even more beautiful up close and looked so kind that my heart ached at what was going on behind her back. She handed me the stuffed animal with a beautiful smile and said slowly in a low voice, "Please tell Kanae to watch out." I felt my blood drain all at once. My mind went blank and I just stood there in shock. The wife was already walking back towards her lovely family while my heart pounded against my ribs and my hands shook. I opened up my hands. She had given me several small, tightly folded pieces of paper along with the stuffed toy. I was freaking out, but I quickly sat down and began to unfold them. Written in small print were Kanae's address, phone number, educational background, work history, family composition, family members' occupations and ages, all of their phone numbers and addresses. There was also a list of Kanae's friends, acquaintances and customers, including their phone numbers and addresses. My name was among them. I never told Kanae. I knew that she was talking shit about me behind my back and also knew that she was trying to get involved with my husband. As for her relationship with that man, he apparently ended it because she kept talking shit about his wife too, eventually pissing the husband off. Since I moved, I haven't given Kanae my new address and I ignore all contact from her. I still have those papers to this day.